Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be doing a non-spoiler review for Yona of the Dawn. This is an ongoing series. It's around 40 volumes out thus far, and so even though it is ongoing, I think having read through almost 40 volumes has made it so that I kind of have an idea of what you're going to get with this story, what you initially start out with versus where it ends up going. I do want to say that I consider this to be a slow build story, which is not to say that it is a slow paced story, because I think actually the opposite is true right from the beginning. It is almost too quick with how much is delivered to you right off the bat and how quickly our characters go from one plot line to the next. It never really feels like you have all that much time to settle in, to get to know the characters, to see a lot of growth, a lot of introspection and reflection. However, I think as the story progresses, you do get that, and it's not just due to the fact that there are so many volumes. I actually do think that you start to see things slow down a little bit and you see a more mature tone coming through. It never, I would say, becomes adult necessarily, but I do think that as the characters mature and as the stakes grow, the story does start to feel a little bit more serious. So I do think the initial setup is something that is going to pull a lot of people in. It just might not necessarily indicate to you how much weight and depth the story has in store. The setup at the beginning is that we're following a young woman named Yona. And at the very beginning of the story, her father, who is the king, is killed. And it was by the hand of somebody who Yona was very close to. And so this is a tremendous betrayal. Yona then has to go on the run to try and survive. And the only person she has on her side is her loyal bodyguard, Hawk. These two realize that if they are going to survive, they need allies. And this leads them to start discovering these magical dragon warriors of legend that are meant to aid a person who is essentially the reincarnated form of this dragon that used to exist in the past, and the dragon warriors are its sworn protectors. And it would seem very much that Yona may be this individual, and thus these dragon warriors are likely going to protect her. And so right away you have this really impactful opening. Yona starts out very pampered, and she is a little narrow in her sights. She doesn't really seem like somebody that would have a very good grasp on power and therefore would likely not make for a very good ruler when she does someday take the throne from her father. So you see this pampered princess go on the run, and then she is pretty helpless. She just has her bodyguard, and while you do have that initial opening that is quite gripping, you go from that to looking for the dragon warriors. Okay, I found one. Here's the other one. Here's the other one. You're kind of catching everybody very quickly. And each dragon warrior has their own little plot line as you're being introduced to them, with one exception that just sort of happens. But when you get introduced to everybody, it happens so fast, and there will be some serious moments that occur. There is some backstory to the characters that it's either shown or alluded to as you are getting to know each of them. But again, it just always feels like it's serviceable. It just feels like it gives you enough to understand this character, where they're from, their personality, and then we move on to the next thing. So it seems odd to describe it as a slow build because of the fact that there is all of this happening at the beginning. However, I do think that you start to go from having these smaller arcs for each of the individual dragon warriors to having this bigger arc overall that really plays a role in how much the story, how large and vast and grand it actually becomes. One of the things pretty early on that I had my suspicions about, and that I think it delivered very well, is the complexity of the situation in general. The thing that led to the betrayal at the very beginning, and that really being built up, and the sacrifices that come into play on Yona's part. So the person that betrayed her, very quickly I started to wonder if this person who justifies their actions because they see it as a necessary evil, they will be a much better ruler than the previous ruler. And also the previous ruler, there was some personal reasons also why the main character, the main antagonistic character, Suwon is his name. There is this justification that you're kind of wondering, well, maybe he's just using that justification for himself to make himself feel better, or maybe it's true, and maybe he would actually be a better ruler, and maybe this was necessary, because you start to see outside threats coming into play that don't just affect our main characters, but affect their entire country. It really highlights how much moral grayness there is to what the antagonist did. And if maybe in a different light, they're actually in some ways the hero. And that was something that pulled me in very quickly. The story is fun, and it's adventurous and silly, and it's entertaining, I would say, throughout, and the beginning especially. But the heavier emotions and the more conflicted feelings, I think, come into play the further that you start to examine the antagonists. I think, as is expected, you have your protagonists, your heroes. You have Yona and Hawk and the Dragon Warriors as the characters that you're following, you're getting to know. And with time, you start to see them more fleshed out. However, it's the expansion of the antagonist and his allies that really made me start to see this story differently, and it brings in a lot to do with politics, which I really like. Something that I find is kind of rare in a lot of stories that deal with royal figures is the difference between liking somebody versus recognizing that they are a poor ruler, and how we want it to be one in the same. A lot of times we want our heroes to be the ones that are the best to rule. We want to believe that the good person is the good ruler. And I do think there is a complete reversal of that, where sometimes it's like the horrible person is willing to do whatever it takes is the one that's actually the best to have power. That's its own kind of story. But having some kind of middle ground and having these two extremes challenged is not something I see as often, and I think Yona does it really well. And not only that, but Yona has to often, on the topic of sacrifice, has to put her own feelings to the side, because she is recognizing sometimes that what she wants or what she doesn't want is not necessarily relevant when it comes to the safety of her people and what is actually the best decision, which I think is it's kind of difficult to watch her have to grapple with these things. You want her to be able to, you feel connected to her, and so you want her to have that satisfaction of, I'm going to get revenge. I'm going to take them out. I'm going to make them pay for what they did. So to see her have to come to terms with what is best, not for herself, but for others, I think was done really, really well. And also there's, of course, the idea of cycles of violence, and is vengeance the answer? And there's those things incorporated. I wouldn't say it's a revenge story on the same level as a lot of others, but there are some themes that are tied to revenge as a whole. I think, too, something that is enhanced the further in you read would be the relationship building and the character development. Yona, obviously, I think that's pretty clear just from what I've been saying, and also the antagonist, Suwon. But the relationship building between the dragon characters and Yona and Hawk, I really like the way that you start to see found family. There's another character that joins in with them as well. But the found family, which is one of my favorite tropes, I know a lot of you really love it as well, I think it's done exceptionally here. It doesn't start that way, though. Another reason why I would describe this as a slow build is because initially the Dragon Warriors have this kind of stirring within them, this obligation to protect this reincarnated version of the original person that they served. And so it feels like it's a little plot convenience. And Hawk, it's pretty clear, is infatuated and in love with Yona. So you're like, well, I mean, he's her bodyguard, so he's protecting her, but also he's clearly in love with her, so, you know, he's gonna stick around. And it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of room for anything to happen, because you already set the stage. You already have made it so, like, okay, look, they're all gonna be loyal to her. Why? Just because of they have this obligation inside this, then there's an inherent need to protect her, and then also Hawk's in love. So there you go. But you start to see genuine relationships build. You see these characters go through things together. You see them start to understand each other's personalities. And a lot of the beginning is very angsty and very flirty, and sometimes kind of stupid jokes or almost creepy levels of flirtation. And once you kind of get past that, everybody starts to act more like real people. It gets so much better. It's somewhat entertaining initially, depending on what you find entertaining, but I have a feeling a fair amount of people aren't going to love that, and they'll kind of have to push through that. And I do want to say it definitely tones it down. I think the characters, once they get past that initial flirtiness, and once Hawk kind of cools it a little bit, then I think that everybody becomes so much more likable, not just as individual characters, but seeing how they interact together, and that sense of found family is really deepened. So if you are annoyed, I promise it gets much better. And then the last thing I'll note about this that I think improves as you progress would be the politics and the action in the battles. The action initially is very much, look at the cool dragon warriors fighting these people, or look at Hawk and he's such a fantastic bodyguard, look at him fighting these people. And eventually you actually get full-on battles with armies, and it will talk about the different strategies that they are taking into consideration. This force has more people in it, but we have our archers, and then also the dragon warriors are unparalleled in their strength, so how can we utilize them, and what about the cavalry? And they actually think through these things, and you will see panels where it will go into depth about, this is the plan here, and if we lose this, then this is what needs to happen. If we lose this, then we're in trouble and we'll have to retreat. And they actually start to discuss those things, which I wasn't expecting from this angsty, flirty situation at the beginning of the story. So I really like that you get into the battles. And I think some of our characters have some pretty phenomenal, awesome, cool moments, because every now and then you just want a cool, awesome panel, and it delivers on that. And then the politics. So I always thought that there was the potential for this story to have fantastic politics, given everything that happens right from the start, but then also what I was describing with the antagonist being somebody who might actually be a better ruler. And how are they going to convince people to side with them? How are they going to reinforce their hold on the throne, but then also try and quell any rebellions that are coming about? How are they going to push down anybody who might try to lay claim on the throne? And then also, how are they going to deal with the secret of their betrayal? Because there are a lot of people that believe Yona has died. And so what happens if people find out that Yona's alive? How are they going to come to terms with that? How are they going to use that information being out in the world to their advantage? So I saw a lot of potential for the politics to be really good, and I think that it also delivered in this department. I do think that what's going to happen for a while for a lot of readers is you might start to actually have fun following Yona and the other characters, and then when it does go back to the antagonist, and when it does go, I almost feel like it's not the right word to describe this character, but I'll call him an antagonist still. When you go to Suwon and you're following them, for a while it's kind of boring. You're like, okay, so they're building an alliance with this other person from this tribe. Okay, now they're building an alliance with this person from this tribe. And then Yona built an alliance over here, so it seems like eventually that's going to be her ally, and those are going to be his allies. Like, all right. And it just feels like it takes time away from maybe where you want the focus to be. But I think it's worth it, because then when everything starts to come together and all the pieces fit, I think it makes it so much, I said at the beginning, it becomes a lot more grand. I think it makes it much more grand. I think it makes it a much more compelling story and more far-reaching. I think that despite the fact that it starts out primarily just being fun and adventurous, I do think that this gets to a point where it's still fun and adventurous. There's still a lot of great humor. There's still a lot of things that make me laugh. It's still a nice break between some of the more serious things I have picked up. While all of that's true, I also think it gets to a point where it really, it gets to be so much bigger than I expected, and it gets to have so much more depth than I expected. So if you've read Yona of the Dawn, I'm very curious your thoughts about it. I'm very curious, who's your favorite character? What are your favorite plot lines? What are your criticisms? What are the highlights for you? Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.